I just want to see my balance, the homeless woman said, her voice barely audible over the bustle of the bank. The manager laughed, a cruel, dismissive laugh that echoed through the marble halls. But then, he saw the numbers on the screen. 7 digits. Her entire life, hidden in plain sight. What happened next would change everything. This is a story about betrayal, survival, and the courage it takes to claim what's rightfully yours. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. I want to feel connected with each of you, because every story we share here is for people just like you, everywhere. Lunaria Hale stood at the entrance of the Jersey National Bank, shivering inside an oversized gray hoodie. Her shoes were soaked, her backpack torn, and her eyes carried the weight of too many nights slept on concrete. People walking past stared at her like she didn't belong anywhere. Today, she needed answers, especially about the account her mother supposedly left behind. Inside, the bank felt too bright, too clean, too full of people who never expected someone like her to step through those glass doors. A mother pulled her son a little closer. A businessman's eyebrow lifted. The security guard's posture straightened like trouble had walked in. Lunaria kept her head down and whispered, I just want to see my balance. The bank manager, a tall white man with perfect hair and a stiff smile, looked her up and down as though dirt had spoken. You want to what? He said loudly, attracting more eyes. Lunaria swallowed her discomfort and repeated herself. Sir, may I please check my balance? The manager chuckled, his voice dripping with disbelief and quiet cruelty. He leaned closer, smirking. Miss, this is a bank, not a donation center. His words sliced through her, and she felt her throat tighten. She tried again. I have an account. Under my name. A few customers began whispering. One even laughed under his breath. Still, Lunaria stood firm, gripping her ID with trembling fingers. The manager sighed dramatically, snatching the ID from her hand like it might leave a stain on his skin. Fine, he muttered. Let's humor you. He walked back to his desk slowly, making sure everyone saw what he thought was a waste of time. Lunaria followed quietly, each step heavier than the last. When he sat down and typed her name, the screen froze for a moment. He tapped the keyboard again, annoyed. Then the system loaded. Suddenly, the manager's confident smirk fell away. His pupils widened. His lips parted. He leaned toward the monitor as if he couldn't trust his eyesight. He checked again, and again. Behind him, Lunaria watched confusion turn into shock. His shoulders stiffened. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. The customers who had mocked her earlier noticed the sudden shift in his expression, whispering to each other, wondering what he was seeing that made his face turn pale. The manager slowly straightened up, blinking rapidly. His voice cracked when he spoke. Ma'am, your account shows. He stopped. He wiped his face with his palm, like he was overheating. The entire room quieted, waiting for him to finish. But he couldn't. The words refused to come out. Lunaria felt her heartbeat hammer in her ears. She stepped closer, confused and afraid. What does it say? She asked softly. The manager looked up at her, really looked at her, for the first time. No arrogance, no mockery, just pure disbelief and sudden fear creeping into his eyes. His fingers shook as he turned the screen slightly toward himself, shielding it from everyone else. I need to ask you something, he whispered, voice trembling. Where did you get this money? Lunaria frowned, not understanding. What money? The manager pointed at the screen, tapping a number she couldn't see. He took a shaky breath. There are 7 digits in your balance. Lunaria's eyes widened. Her knees wobbled. 7 digits? That made no sense, none at all. She backed away slightly, her pulse racing so fast it hurt. The manager leaned forward, voice low, desperate now. Ma'am, this account shouldn't even exist. Lunaria whispered. It wasn't supposed to be mine. And then the alarms inside the bank suddenly began to beep. If Lunaria's story moved you even a little, hit that like button and let us know. Don't forget to subscribe for the rest of her journey, and share this video so someone else can feel inspired by her courage and determination. Lunaria Hale, 24 years old, had lived more lives than her age should allow. Her story did not begin with money or mystery. It began in Maryland, in a quiet hospital room where she was born to a mother she would never meet and a father whose name was missing from every form she ever saw. She entered foster care before she learned to walk, passed from home to home like an item nobody quite knew where to place. Some homes were calm, some were cold, and some were filled with a silence that felt scarier than yelling. But Lunaria carried a soft strength, growing up with questions she was too scared to ask. In one home, she learned to survive by staying invisible. In another, she found a brief kindness from a foster sister who taught her how to braid hair. She spent birthdays wishing for something simple, a place to stay long enough to unpack her bag. But by the time she turned 10, she had lived in 6 different houses. When she grew older, the system labeled her independent, which really meant alone. At 16, she worked part-time cleaning diners, washing dishes, folding laundry at a motel, whatever kept her fed. She was never lazy. She just never had a chance to breathe long enough to dream. Kind strangers sometimes gave her leftover meals, and she learned gratitude early. By 20, she aged out completely. No money, no home, no family. Still, she pushed forward. She walked dogs in Massachusetts, shoveled snow in New Hampshire, and cleaned offices in Washington. Each city held a small piece of her story, a small chapter of survival she stitched together with hope she never understood but never let go of. Every night, she prayed for one thing: a day she wouldn't have to run anymore. A day she could rest. A day she could belong. Even a tiny studio apartment or a worn couch would feel like luxury. But for now, the homeless shelter was all she had. It gave her a bed, a shower, and a door she could close for a few hours of peace. The shelter workers liked her. She always helped sweep the floors and serve food to newcomers. She smiled even when she was exhausted. People often asked how she stayed so calm. Lunaria always said the same thing: "Someone was kind to me once. I want to give that back." It was the truth, and it kept her grounded. That night, after the bank disaster, Lunaria returned to the shelter late. Her thoughts spun like a broken carnival ride. 7 digits. A fortune she didn't understand. A destiny she never asked for. She lay down on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling as rain tapped against the window like nervous fingers. As her eyes finally began to close, footsteps approached her bunk. Slow. Careful. Someone crouched beside her in the dark, breath shaky. Lunaria's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She looked up and froze when she recognized the face from years ago, someone she never expected to see again. The person whispered, voice tight with warning, "They're looking for you." Lunaria was 12 when she arrived at the small blue house in Massachusetts. The foster parents looked friendly when the social worker brought her in, but kindness can hide behind practiced smiles. She learned that quickly. From the first meal, the foster father stared at her like she was a puzzle he didn't want to solve. He commented on her skin in ways meant to sound like jokes, but the poison underneath was clear. "Kids like you should be grateful for a real home," he'd say loudly. Sometimes he'd whisper things he thought she wouldn't understand, but children notice more than adults expect. Lunaria learned to stay quiet, to stay small. The foster mother wasn't cruel, but she wasn't brave either. She watched the man's behavior and stayed silent, folding laundry or stirring soup like nothing was happening. Lunaria understood the unspoken rule of that house. She was allowed to exist, but not to belong. Every day she walked on eggshells, praying not to upset him. School became her escape, but even there, the whispers followed her. A few kids teased her for being in foster care. One girl asked if her real parents didn't want her. Lunaria held back tears until she reached the bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and willed herself not to break. She refused to give them the satisfaction. Her only bright spot was Ms. Hensley, a social worker who visited once a month. Ms. Hensley had warm brown eyes and a voice that sounded like safety. She always knelt beside Lunaria instead of towering over her. "You're stronger than you think," she'd whisper. "One day, you'll write your own story. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." On one visit, Ms. Hensley noticed the sadness in Lunaria's eyes and sat with her on the porch steps. "You deserve kindness," she said softly. "You deserve a future you choose." Lunaria nodded, trying not to cry. Ms. Hensley squeezed her hand. "Hold on to hope. Even when people fail you, hope won't." Those words wrapped around Lunaria like a blanket. But hope doesn't erase reality. One night, the foster father lost his temper when she accidentally spilled a glass of water. He yelled so loudly the neighbors could probably hear. He blamed her for being clumsy, for being a burden, for things she couldn't control. Lunaria curled inward, wishing she could disappear. After that night, she avoided him more than ever. She kept to her room, reading old library books and dreaming of a future far away from Massachusetts. Ms. Hensley noticed the change and pushed for Lunaria to be moved, but paperwork moved slower than pain. Lunaria waited, counting sunsets like they were prison bars. One evening, she tiptoed downstairs for a glass of water. As she reached the kitchen doorway, she froze. The foster father was on the phone, voice harsh and low. "No," he snapped. "She can't know the truth about her parents." He paused, listening. "If she finds out, we're all in trouble." Lunaria's heart slammed against her chest. The truth about her parents? Lunaria couldn't sleep after hearing the foster father's whispered threat. She can't know the truth about her parents. The words replayed like a broken recording. The next morning, while he was at work and the foster mother was running errands, Lunaria searched the house with trembling hands, desperate for anything that explained his fear. She checked closets, drawers, and old boxes stacked in the hallway. Nothing. Then she found a locked cabinet in the basement. The key sat on a nail nearby, ignored for years. She hesitated, her pulse thundering. When she opened the door, she froze. Inside were documents, birth papers, financial letters, and forms with her mother's name, Seraphine Hale. The papers didn't match what she'd been told. According to these documents, her mother wasn't poor or unstable. Seraphine Hale had been wealthy, very wealthy. Bank letters, investment records, and legal forms showed assets Lunaria didn't understand. But the strangest piece was a notice of disappearance filed when Lunaria was only 3 months old. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had vanished. The discovery shook her to her core. Why would a wealthy woman's baby end up in foster care? Who hid the truth? And why did the foster father fear her finding out? Lunaria stuffed the papers into her backpack just before footsteps sounded upstairs. She hurried out of the basement, pretending she'd never been there. Days later, after she was relocated from that home, she carried those documents everywhere, hidden deep in her bag. They felt like a thin thread connecting her to a mother she barely remembered. But the more she stared at them, the more questions they raised. She needed help, and she knew exactly where to look. Years later, in Washington, she found it. The library near Union Station became her refuge. Rows of old records, faded photographs, and dusty microfilm machines felt like a doorway to the past. One afternoon, she approached a kind-faced librarian named Mr. Riles, a retired historian with a gentle smile and a patient voice. He noticed her clutching the documents and offered help without judgment. "Let's see what we can find," he said, guiding her to a long wooden table. Together, they searched public records, business archives, and missing person bulletins from decades earlier. Each search added small puzzle pieces, but never the full picture. Mr. Riles confirmed that Seraphine Hale had once owned equity in a small tech startup in Boston. He found records of her donations to shelters and community programs. She had been respected, admired, and involved in causes that helped vulnerable people. But everything stopped after her disappearance. No official closure. No final report. One afternoon, as Lunaria flipped through an old binder of newspaper clippings, something caught her eye. A photograph. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman in the picture had the same eyes, the same soft smile. Her mother. Seraphine stood beside a tall white man, arm around her shoulders, standing by a car. But the man's face had been aggressively scratched out with something sharp. Lunaria felt a chill crawl across her spine. Whoever he was, someone didn't want him identified. Someone didn't want the truth resurfacing. She stared at the ruined image, feeling the weight of a story buried on purpose. Who was the man in that picture? And why had someone wanted him erased? The night Lunaria confronted the foster father about the hidden documents, everything unraveled. He cornered her in the hallway, voice low and dangerous. "You don't go through my things," he hissed. His eyes blazed with something darker than anger, fear. "If you keep digging, you'll end up like your mother. Gone." His threat shook her soul. She realized then she was no longer safe in that house. The walls felt too close, the air too tight, the shadows too familiar. While the rest of the home slept, Lunaria packed her backpack with only a few clothes, the documents she'd found, and the photograph of her mother. Then she slipped silently out the back door. She didn't know where to go. She just knew she needed distance, miles of it. She walked until her legs trembled, catching a ride on a commuter train heading south. Nobody noticed the scared 12-year-old in the corner seat, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. She didn't look back, not once. Home had never been a home. For days, she drifted between states, moving from bus to bus, station to station. In D.C., she found temporary shelter in parks near Union Station. Her nights were cold, her meals inconsistent, but she learned to stretch every dollar. She kept a list of safe places, churches, bookstores, food pantries. Each small kindness kept her going. During the day, she swept walkways for local shops in exchange for leftover sandwiches. She washed car windows for spare change near traffic lights. People rarely looked at her directly, but some dropped coins without speaking. She learned to accept every gesture, even silent ones. Survival wasn't about pride, it was about tomorrow. Despite the fear, Lunaria felt something new in those days: independence. Nobody yelled at her for existing. Nobody watched her like she didn't belong. The world was rough, but at least it was honest. Each sunrise reminded her she had escaped something dangerous. Each sunset taught her she was still standing, still fighting. But loneliness pressed on her shoulders like a heavy coat. She missed the feeling of belonging, even imagined belonging. On nights when the cold went through her clothes, she'd whisper to herself, "Tomorrow will be kinder." She didn't know if it was true, but hope was the only warmth she had left. Weeks passed, and Lunaria began to feel familiar with the streets around Union Station. She memorized the bus schedules, the security guards' routines, and the spots where she could rest unnoticed. She moved like a shadow, quiet, careful, observant. It was the only way to avoid trouble in a city full of it. Then, one evening, as she walked toward a bench near the station's entrance, she noticed something unsettling. A black SUV was parked across the street, engine humming softly. At first she ignored it. Cars stopped there all the time. But when she moved, the SUV rolled forward slowly. Deliberate. Intentional. She quickened her pace. The SUV matched it. Her heart pounded. Her palms turned damp. Someone was watching her. Someone was following. She stepped into the crowd near the station doors, hoping to disappear. But when she glanced back, the SUV's tinted window rolled down slightly, revealing only a sliver of darkness behind the glass. A voice from inside called out softly, "Lunaria." Lunaria slipped into the station's crowd, hoping the people around her would hide her from whoever sat behind the tinted window. But the SUV didn't lose her. It rolled forward, slow and steady, turning whenever she turned. Her heartbeat hammered so loudly she could barely hear the traffic. When she darted across the crosswalk, the SUV suddenly accelerated, swinging around the corner and stopping directly in front of her. She stumbled back, breath catching in her throat. The doors locked with a heavy click. Then the driver's door opened, and a tall man in a dark jacket stepped out, his badge glinting under the streetlight. "Don't run," he said calmly, raising both hands to show he wasn't holding anything. "You're not in trouble." His voice was smooth, practiced. Too practiced. Lunaria froze, unsure whether she should trust him or sprint into the nearest alley. Her muscles trembled, torn between instinct and fear. "I work for the state," he continued. "Child Services. We've been trying to locate you." His badge said Field Officer, Maryland Child Safety Division. It looked real enough, but Lunaria had learned long ago that anything could look real if someone wanted it to. Her instincts screamed at her to stay alert. She swallowed hard. "Why were you following me?" she asked, voice shaking. The man stepped closer, boots splashing in a shallow puddle. "Because you're not supposed to be alone out here," he said softly. "Your case is complicated, and there are people who want to make sure you're safe." Something in his tone sounded almost sincere. Almost. He gestured toward the SUV, as though inviting her inside. "Let me take you somewhere warm. Somewhere secure." But Lunaria didn't move. "Why now?" she asked. "I've been alone for weeks." The man hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Let's just say certain information recently came to light. Things about your background." That answer chilled her. He wasn't referring to her age or her runaway status. He meant something deeper, something connected to the documents in her backpack. "I don't want to go anywhere," Lunaria murmured, stepping back. The man kept his hands raised but circled slightly, positioning himself between her and the sidewalk. "You don't have to be scared," he said, voice low. "I can protect you." From what? Lunaria wondered. Or from who? She glanced around, hoping a police officer or pedestrian might notice her distress, but everyone passed by, as if the moment were invisible. She felt trapped, caged by his calmness. "Listen," He continued, "You're in danger. People are asking questions about you. Important people." The way he said important made her stomach knot. She hugged her backpack tightly, sensing he knew exactly what was in it. The documents. The photograph. The secret someone had tried to bury. She took another step backward, pretending to shift her weight, preparing to run. The man smiled slightly, as if he'd expected it. Then he tapped the small radio clipped to his jacket, turning away just enough that he thought she wouldn't hear him. But she did. She heard every word. "Yes, we found the girl." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Keep the line open." The moment Lunaria heard the man whisper, "We found the girl," panic surged through her. She didn't wait to hear anything else. She turned sharply and bolted into the crowd, weaving between commuters with the speed of someone who had spent years running from danger. "Lunaria," the man shouted, but she didn't look back. She sprinted through the station doors and down the escalator, her lungs burning. A bus was loading passengers outside, a northbound route. Without thinking, she slipped between two adults and climbed aboard. The driver called out, "Ticket?" But Lunaria kept moving, pretending not to hear. A crowd pushed behind her, blocking the driver's view as she sank into a seat near the back. Her heart hammered as the bus pulled away from the curb. She glanced through the window. The man with the badge burst onto the sidewalk, scanning the buses frantically. For a terrifying moment, his eyes seemed to land on hers, but the bus turned the corner, and he disappeared from sight. Lunaria slumped in her seat, gripping the edge tightly. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she needed distance, city's worth of it. When the bus slowed hours later, the skyline of New York rose before her, tall and overwhelming. She stepped off into Brooklyn, her legs shaky but her resolve solid. She had outrun danger before. She would do it again. That first night, she wandered unfamiliar streets until she found a small church with warm lights still glowing through the stained glass windows. A sign read, "Shelter open, all welcome." Relief washed over her like warm water. She slipped inside, greeted by soft hymns echoing from a radio and the scent of fresh bread. A kind-faced woman named Sister Adeline approached her, offering a blanket and a bowl of soup. "You look like you've had a hard journey," she said gently. Lunaria nodded, too exhausted to speak. Sister Adeline led her to a small cot in the back hall, where the hum of heaters felt like a lullaby. For the first time in days, Lunaria slept without fear of footsteps behind her. The next morning was quieter. Volunteers handed out food bags and folded donated clothes. Lunaria helped sweep the floor, grateful for the safety. Brooklyn felt different, loud but alive, chaotic but protective. She blended easily into the flow of people, another face in a city filled with stories. Later that afternoon, a volunteer sorting clothing donations paused when he saw Lunaria walk by. His brows furrowed. He pulled out his phone, swiping through something quickly. Lunaria didn't notice at first. She was stacking blankets neatly when the volunteer approached, trying to hide the tension in his voice. "Hey, what's your name?" he asked, too casually. Lunaria tensed but answered softly, "Lunaria." The volunteer's eyes widened slightly as he looked at his phone again. She saw a glimpse of a headline, "Missing Youth from Maryland," before he angled the screen away. He whispered under his breath, almost panicked, "I've seen you before." Then louder, trembling, "I think you're the girl from the bulletin online." Brooklyn's winter always felt like it carried a little extra bite, the kind that slipped through cheap jackets and reminded people like Lunaria that safety was often temporary. But inside the narrow brownstone on Mapleton Street, warmth drifted through every room, warmth that came from more than radiators. It came from the woman who opened her door without hesitation. She introduced herself simply as Ms. Reeves, a silver-haired woman with bright, curious eyes and the kind of voice that made even hard stories easier to tell. She didn't ask for details at first. She didn't pry. She simply handed Lunaria a blanket, pointed her to the spare room, and said gently, "You can rest here. Just rest." For the first time in weeks, Lunaria slept without flinching at every sound. The next morning, sunlight filtered through soft beige curtains. Lunaria blinked awake in confusion. No rattling trains, no shouting from the streets, no thin mattress on a shelter cot. Instead, a clean room, a real bed, folded towels on a chair, and a warm smell drifting in from the kitchen. She followed it to find Ms. Reeves cooking oatmeal on the stove. "You didn't have to," Lunaria began. I know, the older woman said with a smile. But you look like someone who hasn't had a warm breakfast in a while. That was true, painfully true. As they ate, Lunaria shared small pieces of her story, never the whole thing, just enough to feel seen without being exposed. Ms. Reeves listened the way few adults ever had, without judgment, without suspicion. Everyone deserves a starting over place, she said softly when Lunaria finished. By afternoon, the woman had already arranged something surprising. There's a small diner 3 blocks down, she said, handing Lunaria a slip of paper. They need someone to help with cleaning. It's not much, but it's honest work. Honest work. Stability. A chance. Lunaria took the job that same day. The pay was barely enough to cover a Metro card, but it was steady. The manager, a round-bellied man with kind eyes, told her she reminded him of his own daughter. Lunaria tried not to cry in the supply closet after that. Every night, she returned to Ms. Reeves's brownstone, where the older woman always had tea waiting. Little by little, for the first time in her life, Lunaria felt something like hope start to take root. But hope was a fragile thing. One evening, as wind rattled the windows and Ms. Reeves hummed in the kitchen, Lunaria found a plain white envelope at the front door. No stamp, no address, just her name, written in clean, careful handwriting. Her pulse flickered. She tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature, no explanation, just one line written in dark ink. You deserve the truth. Meet me in Miami. Her fingers tightened around the letter. Miami. The word felt heavy, electric, dangerous. She looked again toward the quiet kitchen, toward the temporary safety she'd been given. But someone out there knew her name. Someone who believed she deserved answers. And someone who clearly wasn't waiting much longer. Lunaria folds the letter with trembling hands, because for the first time, the truth is calling her by name. Miami's heat was a different kind of intensity, thick, salty, and almost overwhelming after the cold bite of Brooklyn. As Lunaria stepped off the bus, her backpack slung tightly over one shoulder. She felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. The letter had given her nothing but a destination, but something deep in her chest insisted she had to follow it. She checked the address scribbled on the back, a small cafe near Biscayne Bay, the kind of place retirees lingered in, sipping black coffee while watching the world pass by. Lunaria hesitated at the door, her hand trembling slightly before she pushed it open. Inside, the cafe buzzed with soft chatter and clinking spoons. At a corner table sat an older man in a beige linen shirt, his white hair neatly combed back. His posture was straight, banker straight, but his eyes were tired in a way that suggested he carried stories heavier than the warm Miami air. When he lifted his gaze and saw her, something like recognition flickered across his face. You look like her, he murmured before she could speak. Lunaria froze. Sit, he said gently. She slid into the seat opposite him, her heart pounding. You're the one who sent the letter? Yes. He folded his hands, taking a long breath. My name is Mr. Alden. I worked with your mother many years ago. The world seemed to tilt. My mother? Lunaria whispered. Do you know where she is? What happened to her? His expression tightened with sorrow. No, I wish I did. But I owe you the truth I can give. He reached into a worn leather briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it carefully on the table between them. Your mother, he said slowly, set up a trust fund in your name shortly before she disappeared. Lunaria blinked, stunned into silence. She wanted to make sure you'd have a future, something stable, something she couldn't give you at the time. Mr. Alden swallowed hard. The trust, it was substantial. But when she vanished, there were people, very powerful people, who believed the money should have gone back to them. Lunaria's throat tightened. Wealth? Her mother? None of it fit the life she'd lived. Why didn't anyone tell me? She asked, her voice cracking. Why was I left in foster homes? Why didn't anyone protect me? Mr. Alden looked away. Because the people tied to that money made sure you stayed hidden. They had interests. And as long as you were out of sight, they didn't have to deal with you. Lunaria's stomach twisted. So they knew where I was this whole time? They knew enough. He reached again into the briefcase and pulled out a bundle of photographs. Old, carefully preserved prints. They showed a warm-faced young woman holding a baby, smiling in ways Lunaria had never seen. Your mother loved you, he said softly. These are yours. Her hands shook as she lifted the photographs. For a moment, the cafe, the heat, the noise, everything dissolved. All she saw was a mother she never got to remember. But then Mr. Alden leaned forward, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. "There's something else you must understand," he said. "You are not safe. They want the money back, and now they know exactly where you are." Lunaria felt her breath catch, cold fear slicing through the Miami warmth. Mr. Alden grips her wrist urgently, eyes burning with alarm. "You have to run, Lunaria. Right now." Lunaria barely had time to process Mr. Alden's warning before she realized the danger was already close. That night, as she left the small Miami hotel where she had rented a room under a fake name, she noticed shadows moving along the street. Men, too many to count, creeping between parked cars. Her stomach dropped. She ran. Across the asphalt, past flickering streetlights, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The men shouted but didn't slow. They knew her name, knew her path. The city felt like a maze of danger, and every turn led to streets she didn't recognize, unfamiliar and untrusting. She sprinted into a side alley, her chest burning, lungs screaming. Trash bins tipped over as she dashed past them. One of the men shouted her name. Panic turned her legs to lightning. She knew she couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Not until she disappeared completely. The sound of footsteps multiplied. Her pulse raced like a drumbeat, deafening her. She ducked into a convenience store, heart hammering against her ribs. The fluorescent lights were too bright, too stark, but she didn't care. She crouched behind a display of bottled water, holding her breath, hoping no one would notice her. Outside, she could hear them arguing. One voice sharp, another frustrated. They didn't seem to know where she had gone. A small sense of relief passed through her, fleeting but precious. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself a shaky breath, pressing her back against the cold metal shelf. Lunaria scanned the aisles. The supermarket smelled of bread and plastic, of cleaning products and warm coffee. She made a plan. Stay low, wait until they leave, then slip out the back door and vanish into the night. She had done it before. She could do it again. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every sound outside made her flinch. She counted heartbeats, whispered her mother's name to herself, trying to summon courage. She knew she had to stay calm, or panic would betray her hiding spot. Her hands shook as she gripped a bag of rice for balance. Then, a shadow fell across her back. Her stomach twisted violently. She spun around, and her heart stopped. The man from the SUV was standing there, tall, dark coat flaring slightly. His eyes locked on hers, cold and unyielding. The same calculating stare she had feared for months. "Lunaria," he said softly, almost like a name from a nightmare, almost intimate, almost gentle, but there was nothing kind in it. She tried to step back, but her legs refused. Panic stole control as he reached out and grabbed her shoulder. The grip was firm, inescapable, a reminder that no matter how far she ran, some forces could always find her. The other men's voices drifted faintly outside, closer now. Her mind raced. Escape, fight, vanish, but her options were shrinking by the second. Lunaria's eyes widened as she realized. He wasn't here to help. Not this time. Lunaria's chest heaved as the man from the SUV held her shoulder. His grip was firm, cold, and unrelenting. "I know who you are," he said quietly, leaning close. His voice carried a strange urgency. "I knew your mother. I worked with her, trusted her, until she was betrayed." Her mind swirled. "Betrayed?" she whispered. "By who? Tell me." But he only shook his head, eyes darting to the street outside, alert for unseen threats. "Powerful people," he murmured. "People who wanted her gone, who wanted you hidden. Everything your mother built, it almost destroyed her." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling hands. "Why didn't anyone help her? Why didn't anyone protect me?" The man's jaw tightened. "They made sure you stayed invisible. They didn't know you'd survive, but they underestimated you." Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, black flash drive. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "Everything your mother left behind is on here. Financial documents, correspondence, evidence. It proves who she was and what was stolen from her." Lunaria stared at it, blinking. The tiny device felt heavier than a bag of gold. Her fingers shook as she clutched it. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. The man only nodded, expression darkening. "They will come for you if they find you with this," he warned. "You must be careful. Trust no one outside this circle. Protect yourself. Lunaria's stomach twisted. Danger had followed her across states, but the weight of this truth, her mother's life, stolen, hidden, betrayed, was almost unbearable. The street outside rumbled with the distant sounds of cars, unaware of the drama unfolding near the curb. The man's gaze flicked repeatedly toward the shadows, tense. "I have more to tell you," he said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Everything about the people who stole your inheritance." Who? His words cut off abruptly. A screech of tires pierced the night. Lunaria froze, eyes widening in disbelief as a car came hurtling toward them. There was no time to react. The man's body twisted instinctively, shielding her just as the vehicle slammed into him. The force threw him backward, crashing against the hood and bouncing to the pavement. Lunaria's scream tore from her throat, raw and panicked. She dashed to him, shaking, tears blurring her vision. Blood stained the asphalt. His hand twitched slightly. He groaned, but his eyes flickered toward hers, burning with urgency despite the pain. "You must," he rasped. His voice was weak, strained, almost gone. "Trust the flash drive, run, survive." The city lights reflected off the wet street as Lunaria's mind raced. The man she had thought might be her ally, or perhaps another enemy, lay injured, barely conscious. Her mother's secrets, the betrayal, the trust fund, they were all real. All in her hands. A sound behind her made her spin. Footsteps, multiple, fast, deliberate. She could not stay here. She gripped the flash drive tightly and ran into the night, knowing whoever had hit him, and whoever still sought her, would stop at nothing. Lunaria didn't look back as she ran, heart hammering in her chest, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. She ducked into a dimly lit alley, rain slicking the pavement, and pressed herself against a brick wall. Every shadow seemed alive. Every sound a threat. She had to find safety, fast. She remembered Mr. Alden's instructions. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere she could examine the contents without interruption. Her temporary refuge became a small hotel room near Biscayne Bay, rented under a fake name. She locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and finally allowed herself to breathe. The flash drive sat on the desk like a small black beacon. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling. Her mother's life, her inheritance, the secrets everyone wanted to hide. It was all here. She plugged it into the hotel laptop, holding her breath. Files opened slowly. PDFs of contracts, scanned letters, emails, and spreadsheets filled the screen. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through page after page. Her mother, Seraphine Hale, had not just been wealthy. She had been part owner of a small but rapidly growing tech company based in Boston. The company specialized in software security and data management, small but influential. Emails between Seraphine and her partners revealed she had pushed the business forward, advocating for innovation and ethical practices. Lunaria's mother had been brilliant, far more than anyone had ever told her. But it wasn't just the business records that captured her attention. Personal emails, letters from friends, and notes on investments revealed a struggle, one her mother had fought alone. Powerful people had tried to wrest control of the company, and when she resisted, threats had escalated. Lunaria understood now why her mother disappeared. She had been cornered, betrayed by those who should have been allies. Lunaria leaned back, absorbing the weight of it. She had thought she had survived on her own, but her mother's legacy was woven into every document, every spreadsheet. A lineage of resilience, intelligence, and danger. She was not just an ordinary girl. She was the heir to a life deliberately kept from her. Hours passed as she pieced together clues, matching names, dates, and transactions. Patterns emerged, hints of cover-ups, hidden accounts, and subtle manipulations meant to keep her mother's fortune away from her. Lunaria felt a shiver of triumph. She was beginning to understand the scale of what had been taken and how it might be reclaimed. Then she found it. A folder, hidden deep in the drive, buried beneath layers of corporate documents and personal letters. She clicked it open. The title read, "Rightful Beneficiary." Her eyes scanned the text, heart stopping as her own name appeared in bold letters, Lunaria Hale. Her hands trembled. The documents confirmed it. Every asset, every account, every piece of her mother's legacy had been legally marked for her. Not just by inheritance, but as an official record recognized by law. She swallowed hard, breath catching. This was the proof she had been searching for. Her mother had planned for her future, even from the shadows, even from beyond reach. And yet, a cold, sinking thought crept into her mind. Whoever had betrayed her mother would not give up easily. Lunaria's eyes darted to the top of the screen as she heard a soft knock on the hotel door. Someone knew she had the flash drive. Someone was coming. The documents on the flash drive painted a story more twisted than Lunaria had feared. Her mother had trusted someone completely, her business partner, a man named Victor Langley. But after Seraphine vanished, Victor had taken control, siphoning accounts, selling shares, and erasing all traces of Lunaria's rightful claim. Her stomach turned as she read email after email. The betrayal was total. People she had never met, connected only through her mother's company, had been complicit. Every signature on every fraudulent transfer was a dagger through Seraphine's legacy. And now, those daggers pointed toward Lunaria. Determined, she booked the next flight to California. She needed answers. She needed confrontation. Victor Langley's office was in downtown Los Angeles, a sleek glass tower gleaming in the midday sun. Lunaria's pulse raced as she approached the revolving doors. This was the first time she would face the man responsible for robbing her mother and threatening her future. She had rehearsed her words on the plane, imagining his shocked expression when she demanded justice. She clutched the flash drive in her pocket like a weapon, proof of his lies and theft. Every step toward the elevator felt heavy with anticipation. When she reached the reception floor, Lunaria introduced herself calmly. "I'm here to speak with Victor Langley regarding his company and Seraphine Hale's estate," she said. Her voice was steady, though inside, adrenaline coursed through every vein. The receptionist's smile was polite but empty. "I'm sorry, he's unavailable," she said. "You'll need an appointment to meet with Mr. Langley." "I have urgent legal documents," Lunaria protested, producing the flash drive. "This concerns his handling of Seraphine Hale's company and her assets." "It's important." The receptionist shook her head. "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do without prior clearance. Security will escort you out." Lunaria's pulse skipped. Denied? Already? She hadn't even seen him. Before she could argue further, two burly security guards approached, their expressions unreadable but firm. "Ma'am, we need you to step this way," one said, guiding her gently but insistently toward the exit. Every step felt surreal. So close to the truth, so close to confronting the man responsible for her mother's ruin, and yet pushed away like a trespasser. Lunaria's chest burned with rage. She clenched her fists, teeth gritted, heart pounding. The flash drive in her pocket felt like the only leverage she had, but she knew even that might not be enough. Victor Langley had power, connections, people who would ensure he remained untouchable. Outside, the California sun felt too bright, too mocking. Lunaria stood on the sidewalk, watching the tower reflect the sky. Every moment she waited, he remained untouchable, untarnished by the truth. Every second passed, her frustration mounting. She turned away, knowing she couldn't give up. She had to find another way in, another angle, another chance to make him pay for what he did to her mother. As she walked down the street, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She spun around and froze. It was someone familiar, someone she thought she had escaped months ago. The man from the SUV. Lunaria's anger had reached a boiling point. She tracked Victor Langley to his luxurious home in Beverly Hills, a sprawling estate with manicured lawns and high walls. The sun glinted off the windows, a mocking reminder of his wealth, while her mother's legacy had been stolen. Her fists tightened around the flash drive. She approached the front gate, heart pounding. Through the intercom, she called out firmly, "Victor Langley, I know what you did. I want answers." Her voice carried determination, rage, and fear all at once. She wasn't hiding anymore. She refused to back down. Moments later, the gate swung open. Lunaria took a tentative step forward, but a woman's voice rang sharply from inside. "Who was at my door?" Victor's wife appeared, perfectly composed, a subtle smile masking something sharper beneath. "I'm Lunaria Hale," she said, chest rising with confidence. "I am the rightful heir to everything your husband took from my mother. I have proof." Her words echoed against the marble columns, firm and unyielding. The wife's smile faltered. "I see. Well, this is private property. I think you should leave." She reached for her phone. "I'm calling the police." Panic surged, but Lunaria held her ground. She didn't have time to waste. She took a deep breath and explained in concise, trembling sentences the theft, the trust fund, the betrayal of her mother, showing the flash drive when she could. She could see the wife's expression harden with fear and perhaps guilt. Within minutes, a squad car pulled up. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Lunaria braced herself, unsure whether she'd be arrested or ignored. One officer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a worn badge, stepped forward. He studied her for a moment before gesturing to her to explain. She recounted everything: the documents, the hidden trust, the stolen assets, her mother's disappearance. The officer listened quietly, occasionally nodding. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a growing concern. He asked questions about her age, her background, and the flash drive, jotting notes carefully. Finally, after minutes that felt like hours, he leaned closer, voice dropping so only she could hear. "I shouldn't say this, but your case was never closed." Lunaria's heart skipped. Her jaw dropped. "What do you mean?" she whispered urgently. The officer glanced around nervously. "The authorities considered it settled years ago. Your mother was missing, the company, complicated. But legally, nothing ever officially transferred to Victor Langley. Everything he took was unrecorded in a way that left loopholes. You're still the rightful heir." A mix of relief and adrenaline surged through her. Everything she had feared, that she'd lost her mother's legacy forever, was not true. She still had power. She still had leverage. But the officer's eyes were grave. "Be careful. There are people who will do anything to keep that money. And they've been watching." Lunaria nodded, determination replacing fear. She would not be intimidated. She would not run. Not this time. As she turned toward her car, headlights flashed across the street, too many to count. And she saw them, men in black suits, moving with purpose, waiting. They had found her. The officer handed Lunaria a sealed envelope, thick and official-looking, his hands steady but wary. "This was found tucked away in your mother's lawyer's files," he said. "No one knew it existed until recently. You need to see it." Her pulse spiked. The hidden will could change everything. Lunaria tore open the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a crisp set of papers, signed, notarized, and carefully detailed. Her mother's handwriting flowed elegantly across the pages, precise yet personal. Every word carried authority, love, and a subtle warning. She swallowed hard, reading slowly, memorizing every clause. Alongside the will were letters addressed to her, carefully folded. Each one had a date, spanning her early childhood to the day her mother disappeared. Some were for birthdays she'd never celebrated, others for milestones she'd missed in foster care. Every letter carried a message: hope, guidance, and an unshakable belief in her strength. Her eyes blurred with tears. She hadn't known her mother had planned so meticulously. Each word felt like a hand reaching out across years of absence. "You are stronger than they will ever know," one letter read. "No matter what they take, remember who you are and claim what is yours." But the will held more than words of encouragement. It contained instructions, legal and specific. The bulk of her mother's assets, including bank accounts, stock certificates, and properties, were to be transferred only to Lunaria. Nothing could go to Victor Langley or anyone else. The documents confirmed everything Mr. Alden had told her. Her heartbeat quickened. The flash drive, the stolen assets, Victor's betrayal, all pieces of a puzzle now coming together. Her mother had left a path, carefully hidden, for her daughter to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Then she reached the last page. Lunaria's fingers froze. Written in bold, deliberate handwriting, a single directive stood out. "The beneficiary must claim her inheritance in person at the bank where I held my accounts. No proxies. No exceptions." Her mind whirled. The bank was in Maryland, her home state. Returning there would mean stepping into the very place where she had grown up, facing people who might still want to keep her from what was hers. Fear mingled with resolve. She reread the instructions several times. There was no ambiguity, no loophole. Her inheritance, her mother's legacy, could only be claimed by Lunaria herself. The words felt heavy, binding her to a journey she could not avoid. The officer leaned back, watching her reaction. "This is bigger than you imagined," he said softly. "And now, the people who stole from her know you're coming. They'll do everything they can to stop you." Lunaria's hands tightened around the papers, determination burning in her chest. She would not be intimidated. She would not back down. As she packed the letters and will into her backpack, a black car slowly rolled past the officer's parking lot. The tinted window lowered slightly, and she saw the face that haunted her since DC. The man from the SUV, watching, waiting, unblinking. The bus rattled along the interstate, the rhythmic hum of the engine strangely soothing. Lunaria clutched her backpack tightly, containing her mother's will, letters, and the flash drive. Maryland lay ahead, her past, her inheritance, and the danger she had been running from for so long. She tried to calm her racing heart, but the peace didn't last. Midway through the night, the bus swerved sharply, headlights illuminating a dark SUV speeding alongside. Two men jumped from the vehicle onto the roadside, pounding on the doors, shouting her name. Panic surged through Lunaria. They were relentless, just like the man from DC. The passengers screamed, confusion spreading like wildfire. The driver slammed on the brakes, swerving toward a dimly lit rest stop. Lunaria ducked under the seat, heart hammering, eyes wide as she watched the men pound on the bus with growing fury. She couldn't believe how close they had come. Her mind raced. She had escaped danger before, but never like this. On a moving vehicle, surrounded by strangers, with no clear exit. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to vanish, to survive. Her fingers curled tightly around the straps of her backpack. When the bus slowed and stopped at the rest area, Lunaria seized the moment. She bolted through the emergency exit at the back, feet hitting gravel. The men shouted after her, but she darted into the shadows, using the dim lighting and trees to disappear. Her lungs burned, legs trembling, but she didn't stop. Minutes later, she reached a small diner near the rest stop. The glow of neon signs offered temporary sanctuary. Inside, she sat quietly, heart racing, still listening for footsteps outside. Nobody followed. For now, she was safe. She caught her reflection in the window, pale, disheveled, yet unbroken. She booked the next bus north to New Jersey, determined to stay one step ahead. Every mile brought her closer to the bank, to the inheritance, and to the answers she had been searching for. But each mile also brought danger closer, following in silence. By the time she arrived in Newark, she felt exhaustion clawing at her bones, but determination outweighed fear. She checked into a small, nondescript hotel, careful to avoid attention. She reviewed her mother's letters and documents again, planning her next steps. Then, as she walked through the hotel lobby to retrieve her suitcase, she overheard a quiet conversation. Two men in sharp suits were standing near the elevators, speaking in hushed tones. "I hear she finally showed up," one said. "The girl?" the other whispered, voice low, almost reverent. "Yes, the one everyone said would never come. Keep an eye on her." Lunaria froze, every nerve alert. They hadn't seen her yet, but she understood the weight of their words. She wasn't just running for her inheritance anymore. She was being watched, tracked, hunted. Her pulse raced. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to act, to prepare. She had survived DC, Miami, California. Could she survive here? From the shadows of the lobby, Lunaria realized something terrifying. They knew her full name. And now, her next steps could decide everything. Lunaria pushed open the heavy doors of the bank, her legs aching from weeks of running, her coat thin against the chill. The marble floor gleamed under bright lights, a stark contrast to the alleys, shelters, and bus stations she had endured. She felt exposed, small, invisible, and exhausted. The bank manager looked up immediately, his expression a mixture of surprise and disdain. His eyes swept her from head to toe, landing on her worn shoes, the frayed cuffs of her coat, and the dirt smudged across her face. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice dripping with impatience. There was a sneer hidden beneath the politeness, an unspoken judgment. Lunaria's pulse raced. She had expected resistance, but this public humiliation stung. I'm here to claim an account," she said quietly, steadying her hands. "My mother, Seraphine Hale." Her voice barely rose above the hum of the air conditioning. The manager's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" he asked sharply. "Do you have identification? You understand how unusual this is." The implied insult hit her like a slap. She had been homeless, hunted, and running for months. But somehow, he made her feel smaller than all of that. Lunaria reached into her bag and pulled out her ID and the folded will. hands trembling slightly. She placed them quietly on the counter. "I have everything," she said softly. "The legal documents, the will. I am the rightful heir." The manager glanced at the ID, then at the papers. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of disbelief passing through his face. He flipped through the pages, muttering to himself, scanning signatures, notarizations, and official stamps. His eyes darted back and forth, verifying dates and details. Lunaria stayed silent, her back straight despite the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. She could feel the weight of every second, every glance, every judgmental thought in the room. She had run across the country, survived attacks, betrayal, and danger, and now, after all of it, she was so close she could almost taste victory. The manager's lips parted as he tapped a key, bringing the system to life. Screens blinked, accounts loaded, and the numbers began to appear. Lunaria's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft hum of computers. Then the manager's eyes widened. His jaw dropped slightly. The papers in front of him, the system on his screen, it all confirmed the truth. This isn't possible," he whispered, voice trembling, disbelief written across every line of his face. The way he looked at her was no longer disdainful. It was shock, pure and undeniable. Lunaria remained still, holding her breath. Years of fear, pain, and running had led to this moment. She had fought for this. She had survived to claim what was hers. The system finished loading, and the numbers blinked in bold, undeniable clarity, 7 digits, hers. The manager gasped, staring at the screen. Lunaria felt a thrill, but the moment was far from safe. Someone outside the bank was watching. The numbers on the screen stared back at Lunaria like a beacon. 7 digits. Her mother's life's work, all of it hers. Legal, untouchable, undeniable. She could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, the culmination of months of running, hiding, and surviving finally manifesting in a single, overwhelming truth. The bank manager stumbled backward, pale and speechless. I can't believe this," he muttered, glancing nervously at the other staff. She's the sole heir." His voice cracked, the words almost a confession of guilt for doubting her. Lunaria's eyes met his, steady, unwavering. She had earned this, every exhausting step of the way. Around the bank, staff shifted uncomfortably, murmuring to one another. Some avoided eye contact, while others attempted forced smiles. Then, gradually, a ripple of acknowledgement passed through the room. Respect replaced the earlier judgment. Chairs scraped, keyboards clicked, and timid congratulations were whispered under breath. One teller, a young woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. I'm sorry for how he treated you. Congratulations, Miss Hale. That's incredible." Lunaria nodded silently, letting the words wash over her. She didn't need praise. She needed recognition of the truth, and finally, the world was beginning to see it. She walked slowly toward the counter, holding the flash drive and will like shields against a world that had tried to take everything from her. Every step she took felt measured, purposeful, and powerful. This was her inheritance, her mother's legacy, a life stolen and now reclaimed. The manager cleared his throat, his hands trembling. "Ms. Hale, I'm not sure I can explain how this happened. We were unaware of all the hidden documentation. This account, all of this, it's yours legally, unquestionably." Lunaria's lips pressed into a thin line, a mix of satisfaction and wariness. But the victory felt fragile. The truth brought relief, yes, but it also raised questions. Her mother's enemies had been ruthless. The betrayal had been total. And the system she now controlled was not only proof of her mother's fortune, but also a potential target. Lunaria looked around at the staff, the manager, the gleaming numbers on the screen, and felt a mix of triumph and caution. She had survived every attack, uncovered every secret, and reached this moment. Yet, the lingering shadows of those who had stolen from her mother and tried to harm her loomed. She lifted the flash drive, tapping it gently on the counter. Her voice was calm, firm, and demanding attention. "This is mine, every last bit of it, and I intend to find out the truth. Who has been accessing my mother's accounts all these years?" A hush fell over the room. The manager's eyes widened further. Staff exchanged worried glances. The question was loaded, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The answer would not come from the bank, and Lunaria knew it. Someone powerful had been watching, and that someone would act soon. The hunt for truth was far from over. News traveled fast. Within days, Victor Langley was under investigation. The bank had flagged irregularities tied to his unauthorized access to Seraphine Hale's accounts, and law enforcement had moved swiftly. Arrest warrants were issued, and by midday, Victor was led from his mansion in handcuffs, his polished image crumbling before cameras and reporters. Lunaria watched from a distance as he was taken away. There was no satisfaction in gloating, no pleasure in watching a man reduced to a criminal. It was justice, cold and necessary, restoring what her mother had fought for. The stolen legacy, the betrayal, and the danger she had endured were now acknowledged, recorded, and accounted for. After the arrests, Lunaria allowed herself a moment of quiet. The adrenaline that had sustained her through months of running, hiding, and confronting danger finally ebbed. Her body ached, and her mind longed for closure. She thought of the mother she had never truly known, and the sacrifices that had been made on her behalf. With the bank's confirmation of her inheritance secure, Lunaria traveled to Maryland. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the cemetery where Seraphine Hale was buried. For the first time, Lunaria approached her mother's grave, kneeling carefully in the damp earth. She traced the engraved letters of her mother's name with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of a life lost too soon. She whispered words she had rehearsed in her mind for months, words that were never spoken aloud in childhood. "I found it, Mom. I found everything you tried to protect. I'm here. I did it." Tears streamed freely as she placed a single white lily on the headstone, a gesture of love and remembrance. Lunaria lingered, breathing in the silence, letting the wind carry away months of fear and exhaustion. The city, the danger, the betrayal, they all felt smaller here, replaced by a sense of triumph and bittersweet peace. She finally felt the faintest touch of healing. But even as relief settled over her, the world reminded her it was never simple. A soft rustle of paper brushed against her fingers. She looked down, startled. A small envelope had been placed neatly atop her mother's gravestone. No one was in sight. No explanation. Only her name, written clearly on the front. For Lunaria. Her pulse quickened, suspicion and curiosity warring inside her. Who had left it? Was it a warning? A message? Or another piece of the puzzle her mother had left behind? She could feel the weight of it in her hands, the envelope heavier than it should be, as though it contained secrets she wasn't yet ready to face. Lunaria carefully opened it, her fingers shaking. Inside, a single note, typed and impersonal, yet impossible to ignore, reads simply, "You've come this far, but the truth goes deeper. The next step is yours to take." Her breath caught. The fight, the journey, the mysteries of her mother's life, they were far from over. Lunaria stared at the envelope, heart racing, realizing the inheritance was only the beginning. Someone was watching, guiding, and perhaps testing her. The final truth awaited, and she had to be ready. Lunaria sat quietly in her small office, the envelope from her mother still open before her. The note inside was short, precise, yet powerful. Every step of her journey, the danger, the betrayals, the chase, had been orchestrated to teach her courage, resilience, and the truth of her heritage. Her mother's foresight left Lunaria awestruck. Each obstacle, every shadow she had run from, had been a lesson wrapped in mystery. It was a legacy beyond wealth, a roadmap of strength, strategy, and compassion. She finally understood. Seraphine Hale had not abandoned her. She had prepared her. The realization brought a wave of peace. The bank accounts, the tech fortune, the 7-digit inheritance, it was not just money. It was empowerment, responsibility, and the chance to reshape her world. Lunaria's tears fell freely, but this time, they carried joy and gratitude, not fear. With renewed purpose, she began putting her wealth to work. Shelters for homeless youth, programs for foster children, scholarships for overlooked students. Every initiative reflected her mother's vision and her own empathy. Lunaria knew what it was like to be invisible, to be underestimated, and she would never let others suffer alone. Months passed, and her life found balance between wealth, justice, and service. She traveled, spoke at foundations, and quietly ensured that every dollar she inherited could change lives. But she never forgot the lessons of danger, betrayal, and the chase. Every smile she encountered, every story she heard, reminded her of the girl she had once been. One crisp morning, Lunaria walked past a bank in New York. The sun reflected off the glass doors, just as it had all those months ago when she first claimed her inheritance. Her pace slowed as she noticed a young girl, ragged and frightened, being mocked by a bank employee. The scene struck a chord deep in her heart. Without hesitation, Lunaria stepped forward. The girl flinched at first, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Lunaria knelt slightly, smiling gently, her warmth radiating calm. "Let me help you see your balance," she said softly, the words carrying hope, kindness, and understanding. The young girl blinked, confusion giving way to trust. Lunaria extended her hand, not just as a helper, but as someone who understood pain, injustice, and the long journey from invisibility to empowerment. In that moment, the cycle broke. Wealth, knowledge, and empathy combined to create change. Lunaria walked away slowly, glancing back once. The girl's fear was replaced by curiosity, her uncertainty tempered by hope. Lunaria's heart swelled with satisfaction. She had finally completed her journey, not just reclaiming her mother's fortune, but honoring her legacy in the truest way possible. The streets of New York continued their busy rhythm, oblivious to her presence. Yet Lunaria's actions whispered a quiet truth. Power was not measured by money alone, but by the kindness, empathy, and courage one shared with the world. In the end, Lunaria learned that the greatest inheritance is not wealth. It is the strength to lift others, the courage to face injustice, and the compassion to transform lives. And in helping one lost soul, she honored her mother and herself, proving that empathy is the true currency of life. If Lunaria's journey taught us anything, it's that courage, kindness, and empathy can change lives. Share this story to inspire someone today, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more powerful, life-changing tales that remind us why hope always matters.